What would you do if the world looked at you and decided you didn't belong before you even had the chance to speak for 17-year-old Malik Johnson? A boarding pass for Seat 2B was supposed to be his golden ticket to a life-changing future. Instead, it became the trigger for humiliation at 35,000 feet. A flight attendant refused to believe he could possibly belong in first class, turning a simple moment of boarding into a storm of suspicion, accusation, and shame. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice from the cockpit changed everything. The captain recognized Malik's last name, a name tied to a legacy far greater than prejudice, and what followed would shake not just one crew member, but an entire airline. Was it fate, karma, or justice finally catching up in the most public of ways? How could one teenager's quiet strength ripple into a story that millions would see, share, and never forget? Stay with us as we uncover every twist of this gripping real-life drama. And ask yourself, what would you have done in Malik's place if this story moves you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the powerful true stories we bring to life. The boarding pass trembled slightly in Malik Johnson's hand. Seat 2B, first class, printed in bold black ink on a crisp rectangle of cardstock. It looked ordinary, almost fragile. Yet, to him, it felt like the heaviest document he had ever carried. A key, a ticket, a bridge into a future he had dreamed of but never dared to fully believe was possible. 17 years old, a brilliant mind burning in a teenager's frame. Malik was on his way to Seattle, not for vacation, not for a family trip, but for the summer that could change everything. He had been chosen out of thousands of applicants for the prestigious North Star Dynamics Aerospace internship. His code, an elegant solution for drone stabilization, had caught the eye of engineers twice his age. Now, a company car and a waiting research team would meet him at the other end. But right now, he was just a boy in a hoodie, clutching a satchel that carried both his laptop and his hopes. The jet bridge stretched out before him, a narrow tunnel humming with recycled air, faint traces of jet fuel, and the nervous energy of travelers rushing toward their seats. Malik's sneakers squeaked softly on the industrial carpet as he walked, each step pulling him closer to a cabin he had never entered before. First class. He had seen it in movies. He had glanced at it once or twice through the curtain when flying coach with his parents, but this time, that tiny embossed number on his boarding pass gave him permission. He could still hear his mother's voice from less than an hour ago, a soft whisper against his ear at the departure gate. Be safe, be smart, make us proud. Her hug had been warm but tight, as though she hated to let him go. His father, General Anthony Johnson, had simply gripped his shoulder firmly, eyes shining with quiet pride. The general was not a man of many words, but his final look had carried volumes. You've got this, son. Malik adjusted the strap of his satchel, the worn leather creaking slightly. It had been his father's once, back when deployments and classified missions filled their family calendar. Now it was his, carrying not weapons or orders, but code lines of thought, creativity, invention. As he reached the cabin door, he took a breath. The threshold mattered. Past this point, everything would feel different. And it did. The air shifted immediately. First class was hushed, calm, with leather seats that looked more like private pods than chairs. A faint scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner replaced the metallic tang of the jet bridge. Passengers moved differently here, slower, deliberate, as though they had all the time in the world. Malik's eyes swept the rows quickly, both nervous and excited. 1A, 1B, and then his row 2, his seat, the window. Perfect. A smile tugged at his lips as he stepped forward, the boarding pass gripped tighter in his hand. This was it, the beginning. But just as his sneaker crossed into the aisle, a shadow fell across his path. A woman stood there, blocking the way. Mid-40s, trim, blonde hair cut into a severe bob that framed her face like armor. Her uniform was crisp, her name tag polished. It read, Linda Harper. Her arms crossed lightly, her stance casual but deliberate, a gait disguised as a person, and her smile thin, brittle, a line that never touched her eyes. "Can I help you, young man?" The words were polite on the surface, but Malik caught the edge underneath. The way she stressed young man, the verbal pat on the head, a question that was not really a question. He straightened a little. "Yes, ma'am, just heading to my seat, 2B. He lifted the boarding pass with careful respect, offering it as proof, as shield. Linda's eyes flickered down, barely glancing at the pass, then up again, scanning him head to toe. Hoodie, sneakers, dark skin, locks tied neatly back, a sweatshirt from his school, worn but clean. Her smile tightened. "I think you might be mistaken," she said softly, conspiratorial, as if doing him a favor. She leaned in just enough to lower her voice. "Economy's down the aisle. This is first class." The heat rose instantly in Malik's cheeks, prickling, burning, the familiar sting. He had felt it before in expensive stores, in restaurants with white tablecloths, in the long pause before a cashier decided whether to accept his card. That silent, heavy assumption. "You don't belong here." He swallowed hard. "I'm not mistaken," he said, voice steady. He extended the boarding pass further. "Seat 2B, Malik Johnson." Linda didn't take it. She let it hang in the air between them as though touching it might give it legitimacy. Instead, she tilted her head, a skeptical smile playing at her lips. Sometimes the gate agents mix things up. She murmured, "Why don't you let me see that?" She plucked the pass from his fingers with sharp precision, nails clicking against the cardstock like a gavel. Turning it over, holding it up to the light as though it might reveal invisible ink, she frowned. "Johnson," she said the name slowly, rolling it around in her mouth as if tasting something sour. Behind Malik, another passenger sighed impatiently. A man in a sharp gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His shoes clicked as he shifted, his annoyance tangible. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice gravelly, clipped, like someone used to charging for every minute of his time. Linda's head snapped up, and just like that, her smile turned dazzling, professional, warm. "Just a little mix-up, sir," she said brightly. "We'll have it sorted out right away." Then, turning back to Malik, the warmth vanished. Her tone cooled, sharpened, became authoritative. "Look," she said, each word clipped. "I'm not sure how you got this ticket, but there's no way you're assigned to this seat. This cabin is for our premium frequent flyers. You'll need to step aside while we clear this up." The words hit like a slap. Malik's grip tightened on his satchel. He felt the eyes, now the businessman glaring, a woman across the aisle clutching her pearls, a couple whispering, the hush of judgment, the weight of scrutiny. His chest tightened. He thought of his father's voice, steady in his memory. "Stay calm. Be smarter. Don't let their ignorance become your anger." He drew a slow breath, fighting the storm building in his chest. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not moving until you scan my ticket." Linda's eyes flashed, red creeping up her neck, her lips thinned into a hard line. "Are you refusing to follow a crew member's instruction?" The word, sharp as a blade, sliced the air. Around them, the cabin stilled. The businessman folded his arms. The woman with pearls raised her phone. Every passenger within earshot leaned closer. Malik felt it the shift. He was no longer just a teenager with a boarding pass. In Linda's framing, he was something else, a problem, a threat. His heart pounded in his ribs, his hands clenched in his hoodie pocket. And, in that moment, standing in the aisle of first class, surrounded by strangers, Malik Johnson had never felt more alone. The silence that followed Linda Harper's question was heavier than the recycled air inside the cabin. Malik could feel every pair of eyes on him. He had been warned about this moment his whole life, though never quite in these words. "Are you refusing to follow a crew member's instruction?" That line was a trap. It transformed him from a student, from an invited guest of a major company, into something else. It made him sound like a threat. Malik stood his ground, but his mind raced. He thought about what this seat represented. It wasn't just comfort. It wasn't about reclining leather or a glass of orange juice before takeoff. This seat was an acknowledgement, a sign from North Star Dynamics that they saw him not as a kid from Atlanta, but as someone valuable, someone worthy. To surrender it without a fight would mean letting prejudice rewrite the truth of who he was. He unclenched his fist slowly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not refusing, ma'am. I'm asking you to scan my ticket and confirm. That's all." Linda's jaw tightened. The smile was gone. She held his boarding pass like it was evidence in a crime, flipping it again, even though she had already read the words. Then she shook her head. "This isn't right. Our premium seats don't just go to anyone who walks in off the street. You need to move to the galley so I can finish boarding the rest of our passengers. You're holding up the process." The words twisted inside him. Off the street. She hadn't said it directly, but he heard what she meant. The implication was that someone like him could only be here by mistake, or worse, by deceit. Behind him, the businessman in 1A later, Malik would learn his name was Richard Lawson, let out a low sigh of irritation. "Can we move this along?" he muttered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Some of us have connections to make." The pearl-clutching woman leaned toward her husband and whispered audibly, "I told you this is why they need to enforce stricter boarding." Her eyes darted at Malik like he was a breach in a wall. Every comment was a pinprick, and together they became a sting that spread across his chest. Malik straightened his back, drawing in air slowly. He had imagined this flight so many times, but never this version of it. In his daydreams, he was greeted with congratulations, perhaps even awe, for being the youngest intern in a program usually reserved for college students. In reality, he was being measured, judged, found wanting, before he had even sat down. Linda gestured sharply toward the galley near the cockpit. "Step aside now. I'll come get you once I've found your actual seat." She stressed the word actual, slicing it like a blade. Malik's throat tightened. He imagined himself walking back, standing by the door like a child in detention, while the cabin filled with curious, disapproving stares. He pictured Linda announcing loudly that he belonged in coach, escorting him down the aisle as passengers smirked or looked away. The shame would be unbearable. Worse, the HR rep at North Star Dynamics who had booked the flight would hear about an incident. His future might collapse before it had even begun. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Be smarter. Don't let their ignorance become your anger." He inhaled deeply, respectfully. "Ms. Harper, my ticket says 2B. It was booked by the company that invited me. If you just scan it, the system will confirm. I'll wait here until you do." The firmness in his voice surprised even him. For a moment, Linda faltered. Her eyes flickered to the handheld scanner at her hip. Then, with deliberate defiance, she crossed her arms tighter. "There's no need. I already know what it will say." Her certainty chilled him. She hadn't even tried. It wasn't about procedure. It was about her belief that he didn't belong. "Fine. She snapped. She lifted the cabin phone from its cradle, pressing a button. Her tone became clipped, official, her words amplified for everyone nearby. "This is Harper at the main cabin door. I need a gate supervisor and security at the jet bridge. Passenger refusing to comply." The word security dropped like a stone into water, rippling outward instantly. The rustle of jackets stopped. The click of overhead bins paused. A hush spread over first class as though someone had sucked the air out of the room. Malik's pulse thundered in his ears. His breath came faster, though he fought to steady it, refusing to comply. That was how she had framed it. Not that he was asking her to follow procedure, not that he was standing politely, holding out his boarding pass. To everyone who heard her voice, he was now something dangerous, unpredictable, in need of control. He could feel the eyes again, dozens of them, pressing on him like weights. The businessman in 1A rustled his newspaper irritably. The pearl-clutching woman whispered faster, her hand trembling around her phone. Others simply stared, curious but cautious, as though waiting to see what kind of spectacle this would become. Inside, Malik's thoughts spun wildly. Should he comply, step aside quietly, prove that he was cooperative, non-threatening? If he did, maybe the situation would cool, but if he gave up his seat now, would the damage already be done? Would they write it into the report young man removed from first class after dispute? His chest ached with the weight of it. He was 17, but at this moment he felt much older, aged by the eyes of strangers who saw not his dreams, not his hard work, but only a skin color they equated with suspicion. The cabin door opened behind him. Two figures entered: Diego Ramirez, a young gate agent clutching a tablet, his face flushed from jogging, and Officer Carla Nguyen, tall, broad-shouldered, her uniform stiff, her hand resting near the radio on her belt. "What's the situation?" Diego asked, his voice breathless. Linda straightened, her posture now radiating authority. She pointed at Malik without looking him in the eye. "This passenger is holding what appears to be a fraudulent boarding pass for 2B. He has refused multiple instructions to move and has become increasingly aggressive. He's delaying our entire boarding process. Aggressive." The word sliced deeper than any other. Malik's heart dropped. He had been nothing but polite. His voice never rose. His movements had been calm, controlled, deliberate. Aggressive was a label that transformed him from an ambitious intern into a stereotype. "That's not true," he said quickly, his voice shaking despite his effort to steady it. "I asked her to scan my ticket. She refused. I'm not aggressive. I'm just standing here." Diego's eyes flicked between them. He looked uncertain, conflicted. "I can check the manifest," he offered, lifting his tablet. "It will only take a moment. There's no need." Linda cut him off sharply. "He has been disruptive. Policy is clear. He needs to be removed while we investigate." The words carried finality, a sentence pronounced before a trial. Officer Nguyen stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Son, I need you to come with me. We can sort this out outside the plane." The pressure built in Malik's chest until it was almost unbearable. If he stepped off now, even for a moment, he feared he would never be allowed back on. His seat, his future, would vanish in the blur of official language and cold procedure. He opened his mouth to protest, to plead, when a loud voice rose behind him, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Hold on just a damn minute." The gravelly authority of the businessman in 1A filled the cabin. Richard Lawson stood up, folding his newspaper with a crack. His tall frame loomed over the aisle as he fixed Linda with a hard stare. "I've been sitting right here," he said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "This young man has been nothing but respectful. He showed his ticket. You refused to scan it. I saw the whole thing." Linda's face whitened. She hadn't expected resistance from someone with this much obvious status. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a security matter. Please return to your seat." Lawson didn't budge. "No, I've flown this airline for 25 years. I know bad service when I see it. This isn't procedure. This is harassment." The cabin shifted. Passengers who had been silent now glanced at each other, whispers buzzing. For the first time, Malik didn't feel completely alone. Someone had seen him clearly. But even with Lawson's support, the wall of authority in front of him, Linda, Diego, Officer Nguyen remained, his future still balanced on the edge of a blade. He clenched the strap of his satchel, drawing on the last of his composure. The fight wasn't over, but at least he wasn't invisible anymore. The air inside the first-class cabin felt charged, as if a storm was building in the confined space. Malik stood in the aisle, his boarding pass now hostage in Linda Harper's hand. He could feel his stomach twist into knots as passengers settled in, some openly watching, others pretending to look away, but stealing glances behind raised newspapers or glowing phone screens. Richard Lawson's words still hung in the air like an unexpected shield. The businessman's support had cut through the silence, but it hadn't solved the problem. Linda's authority remained intact, bolstered by the presence of Officer Carla Nguyen and Diego Ramirez, clutching his tablet nervously. Malik knew he was walking a line so thin it could snap with a single wrong move. Linda's lips pressed into a tight smile, though her eyes flickered with irritation. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Lawson," she said with a practiced sweetness. "But this matter is for the crew and security to handle." Her voice rose slightly, making sure everyone in the cabin could hear. "For the safety and comfort of our passengers, this young man will need to step aside while we sort this out." The phrase safety and comfort twisted Malik's insides. He wasn't dangerous, he wasn't disruptive, but the implication was clear. His very presence in that seat was unsafe, uncomfortable, suspect. Richard Lawson stayed on his feet, arms crossed, eyes locked on her. "I know what I saw. He is calm. You are the one escalating." Linda's mask cracked. A flash of anger crossed her face before she quickly recovered, but the crack was enough. Passengers were whispering now, murmurs rolling through the cabin like small waves. Some looked at Malik with pity, others looked annoyed, as though wishing the problem would simply disappear so they could get on with their flight. Malik's chest rose and fell with the effort of keeping his composure. He wanted to shout, to demand justice, but he could hear his father's voice echoing in his mind, steady and unyielding. "Be calm, son. The world expects your anger. What they don't expect is your grace." Linda held up the boarding pass between two fingers as though it might burn her. "Mr. Ramirez," she said to the gate agent, "this document doesn't match what's in the system." "Isn't that right?" Diego shifted uncomfortably. "I'd have to scan it to confirm," he admitted, glancing at Malik briefly. "If I could just—" Linda cut him off sharply. "There's no need. I already told you. It flagged an issue." She turned back to Officer Nguyen. "Please escort him off the aircraft so we can continue boarding." The words landed like a sentence passed down from a judge. Malik's throat closed, panic flaring in his chest. If he left the aircraft now, he knew it would be almost impossible to get back on. He would be stranded in the terminal, his internship in jeopardy, his dignity in tatters. "Wait," Malik said, his voice tight but steady. He reached for his satchel, fumbling for his phone. His hand shook as he pulled it free, the screen lighting up. "Here." "This is the confirmation email from North Star Dynamics. It shows my name, the flight number, the seat assignment. There's even a corporate contact number. Call them if you want. Please." He held the phone out toward Linda. His heart pounded, his breath shallow. This was his proof, his lifeline. Linda didn't even look at it. She waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can fake an email. That proves nothing. The dismissal hit harder than any insult. It wasn't just that she doubted him. It was that she refused to even acknowledge the possibility of his truth. His reality, his hard-earned opportunity, erased with a wave of her hand. Malik felt the sting of tears threaten, but he forced them back. He would not cry here, not in front of her, not in front of strangers who already doubted him. The passengers were shifting in their seats now, sensing the tension. The woman with pearls whispered to her husband, her eyes darting nervously toward Malik as though he might erupt. Another man leaned across the aisle, shaking his head in disapproval. A young woman in 3C tapped furiously on her phone, no doubt typing out a live account of the drama unfolding before her. Linda leaned closer, her voice low enough for only Malik to hear. "You should have just gone back when I gave you the chance. Now you've made this harder for yourself." The words dripped with condescension, a quiet cruelty that pierced deeper than her public statements. Malik's jaw clenched. He thought of his mother's parting words, "Make us proud," and the humiliation tightened like a noose. "Son," Officer Nguyen said again, her voice calm but carrying authority. "Step outside with me. Let's handle this before it becomes worse." Worse. Malik's stomach turned. Worse meant handcuffs, headlines, the kind of viral video that didn't make you a hero, but a cautionary tale. He could feel the cabin tipping against him, gravity pulling him toward defeat. Richard Lawson cleared his throat. "This is absurd," he said loudly. "The boy has a ticket. If you'd just scan it, we'd all be on our way." Linda's head whipped toward him. "Mr. Lawson, I must ask you to remain seated." "I'll sit when you've done your job," Lawson shot back. His tone carried the sharpness of boardrooms, the kind of voice that cut through excuses. For a fleeting second, Malik felt a spark of hope. Someone believed him. Someone was willing to stand with him. But the wall of uniforms in front of him still seemed immovable. His shoulders sagged, the weight of resignation pressing down. Maybe it was better to step off, to fight this battle in another arena. Maybe he was too young, too small, to win against a system built on authority and suspicion. He lowered his eyes, feeling the heat of humiliation crawl up his neck. The victory of silence was within Linda's grasp. She could already taste it. And then, just as Malik took a half-step back, the cabin door swung open. A voice rolled through the stillness, calm, steady, resonant with authority that silenced every whisper. "What seems to be the problem here? Ms. Harper." The tone was not loud, but it carried the weight of command. Every head turned toward the source. Captain Thomas Avery stood in the doorway of the cockpit, silver hair neatly trimmed, uniform immaculate. The 4 stripes on his shoulders gleamed beneath the cabin lights. His presence was electric, a reminder that in the hierarchy of an aircraft, the captain's word was final law. He looked first at Linda, then at Malik, then at the passengers whose faces bore everything from irritation to unease. His calm blue eyes lingered on Malik for a long moment, studying, assessing, seeing. The storm had a new center now. Malik's chest rose with a sudden breath. For the first time since stepping into first class, he didn't feel invisible. Someone in authority had finally entered the scene, and the balance had shifted. Captain Avery waited for Linda's response. The entire cabin did the same, breaths held in a silence thick enough to cut. Linda straightened, clutching the boarding pass tightly in her hand as though it might save her. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the first cracks in her confidence. "Captain, thank you for stepping in. This passenger presented a questionable boarding pass for 2B. He has refused to comply with my instructions and was becoming agitated. For the safety of the cabin, I requested security. She delivered the lines smoothly, the perfect script of professionalism. But Captain Avery's eyes didn't leave her face. He listened, but his silence held judgment. When she finished, he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Malik, and when he spoke, the cabin itself seemed to lean forward to hear. "Son," Captain Avery said evenly, "what's your side of the story?" For the first time in 20 long minutes, Malik was given the dignity of being asked. The cabin's silence was almost unnatural. Even the hum of the ventilation seemed to fade when Captain Thomas Avery addressed Malik. Every passenger leaned slightly forward, waiting, as if the boy's words would tip the scales of justice. Malik swallowed. His throat was dry, his palms slick with sweat, but the captain's calm gaze steadied him. For the first time, someone in uniform wasn't looking at him like a problem to be removed, but like a person whose truth mattered. That recognition alone gave him strength. "Sir," Malik began, forcing his voice steady, "my name is Malik Johnson. My boarding pass is for seat 2B. He gestured toward Linda, who still clutched the paper like evidence in a trial. I showed it to her, but she said it must be a mistake. I asked her to scan it, but she refused. When I tried to show her my confirmation email from North Star Dynamics, she said it could be fake and called security. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't moved from this spot." "All I'm asking is for someone to scan the ticket." The captain listened, his expression unreadable, absorbing every word. When Malik finished, a beat of silence followed. Then Captain Avery shifted his gaze to Linda Harper. His tone remained even, but a steel edge threaded through it. "Ms. Harper, did you scan this passenger's boarding pass?" Linda hesitated. For the first time, she faltered. "Well, Captain, my device was flagging a system-wide alert for this seat block, and based on my experience, you did not scan his specific pass." Captain Avery interrupted, his voice cutting clean through her excuse. It was not a question. It was a statement. Linda's cheeks flushed pink. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The captain turned to Diego Ramirez. "Mr. Ramirez, scan the ticket, please." Diego, visibly relieved to be given clear direction, nodded quickly. "Yes, Captain." He stepped forward, his tablet already powered on. Malik's heart raced as he handed the boarding pass over. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The scanner beeped. A green check mark glowed brightly on the screen. "Johnson, Malik, Seat 2B, Zone 1, confirmed," Diego read aloud. The release of tension in the cabin was palpable. A soft murmur rippled through the passengers, a collective exhale of disbelief and recognition. Richard Lawson sank back into his seat with a satisfied nod, muttering, "Knew it." Even the pearl-clutching woman shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting away. Officer Carla Nguyen stepped back a pace, her authority no longer needed. Malik's chest loosened as relief washed through him, but it was short-lived. He knew the battle wasn't over. Linda's voice, sharp with desperation, pierced the moment. That must be a system update. It was showing an error just moments ago, but Captain Avery didn't even look at her. He studied the boarding pass in his own hands now, his eyes moving slowly across the printed letters. Then his gaze froze on the name, Johnson. Something shifted in his face. His blue eyes softened, his jaw relaxed, and for the first time, he smiled. It was not a polite smile for passengers. It was something deeper, something personal. "Johnson," he said quietly, almost to himself. He looked up, meeting Malik's eyes. "Tell me, son, is your father General Anthony Johnson?" The question stunned Malik. For a second, he couldn't find his voice. His father's name, spoken here, in this context, sounded surreal. He nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, he is." The captain's smile widened with genuine warmth. He handed the boarding pass back with a kind of reverence. "Well, I'll be Anthony Johnson's boy." The cabin leaned in. Even those who had doubted Malik moments ago now seemed to hold their breath, sensing a shift in gravity. Captain Avery's voice carried not just authority, but memory. "Your father was my wing commander when I flew F-16s with the 388th Fighter Wing. He wasn't just a leader, he was the kind of man you'd follow anywhere. Once, over hostile territory, my jet lost its engine. I was seconds from ejecting. Your father stayed on my wing, calm as a stone, talking me through a landing everyone said was impossible. He saved my life. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." A hush swept over the cabin. Passengers who had been whispering judgments minutes earlier now stared at Malik with wide eyes. He was no longer just a teenager in a hoodie. He was the son of a hero. Malik felt his chest tighten for a new reason. Pride, awe, and a strange humility swirled together. He had always known his father's career was extraordinary, but hearing this story here, from this man, gave it weight he had never fully understood. The captain's expression hardened as he turned back to Linda Harper. His voice lost all warmth. "Ms. Harper, you've made a very serious mistake." Each word landed like a gavel strike. Linda's face drained of color. Her lips parted, searching for words, but nothing came out. Captain Avery continued, his tone sharp with disappointment. "General Johnson taught us to see people for who they are, not what we assume. He taught us that leadership means judgment based on facts, not prejudice. You chose to ignore both procedure and decency. You humiliated a passenger who was rightfully in his seat. Worse, you did it in front of this entire cabin. You failed in your duty, and you disrespected the uniform you wear." The passengers watched silently. Some nodded subtly in agreement. Others simply looked away, discomfort etched on their faces. Richard Lawson folded his arms, satisfied. Linda stammered, "Captain, I only meant to..." No, Avery cut her off, his voice cold and final. "You didn't think. You assumed. And in doing so, you insulted not only this young man, but the standards of this airline. Step aside." Linda stepped back, trembling, her authority crumbling like sand. Captain Avery placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, guiding him gently down the aisle. "Come with me, son. Let's get you settled in your seat." The gesture was both protective and symbolic. As they reached row 2, Avery paused, double-checking the seat. He smoothed the blanket, adjusted the headrest, and motioned for Malik to sit. Then, leaning closer, he spoke quietly so only Malik could hear. "When we're at cruising altitude, I'd like you to visit the cockpit. I think you'll enjoy the avionics." Malik's breath caught. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored." The captain gave a final reassuring nod before straightening. He addressed the cabin with calm authority. "My apologies for the delay. Folks, we'll be closing the door shortly and on our way to Seattle." As he walked back toward the cockpit, he passed Linda, who stood frozen by the galley. His voice dropped low enough for only her to hear. "We will have a conversation when we land." The words were quiet, but their weight was crushing. The cockpit door closed with a firm click, leaving Linda alone with her humiliation. For the next 5 hours, she would have to serve drinks and meals to the very people who had witnessed her downfall. Malik sank into seat 2B, his heart still racing, but this time with something else: relief, pride, and the beginning of something larger than himself. The boy who had been seconds from humiliation now sat as a symbol of dignity defended. his name echoing through the cabin with unexpected power. The cabin door shut with a heavy thud, and the engines began their low, rising rumble. Malik sat back in seat 2B, the leather cool against his arms, but his body still buzzed with tension. He had survived the storm of humiliation and suspicion, but the echoes of it lingered inside him like aftershocks of an earthquake. He looked out the window as the aircraft pushed back, the runway lights glowing like constellations on the ground. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a journey toward a future he had worked tirelessly to earn. Instead, it had already become a trial. Linda Harper moved stiffly through the cabin, her professional mask cracked, but still in place. She delivered the safety demonstration with a flat voice that lacked its usual crispness. Her words sounded hollow, mechanical, the cadence of someone going through motions with no conviction. Passengers watched with polite disinterest, but Malik could sense their awareness. Everyone in the first-class cabin knew what had just transpired. As the plane lifted off, Malik's stomach dropped with the acceleration, but his eyes stayed fixed on the seat in front of him. He replayed the last 30 minutes in his mind, each exchange replaying with brutal clarity. Linda's dismissive tone, the word aggressive, the captain's intervention, the moment his father's name had changed everything. It was surreal. A single surname had altered the trajectory of the encounter. Malik wrestled with conflicting emotions. Pride in his father's legacy mixed with a sharp sting of anger that it had taken that legacy to validate his right to sit in this seat. Why hadn't his own merit been enough? The thought gnawed at him. His algorithm had won competitions. His acceptance into North Star dynamics was based on skill and brilliance. Yet none of that had shielded him. Only the shadow of his father's heroism had turned the tide. He shifted uncomfortably, the seat suddenly feeling less like a reward and more like a battlefield scar. He thought of his father's lessons, the endless talks about dignity and patience. His father had said that carrying their name meant carrying both a gift and a burden. Tonight, he understood that truth in a way he never had before. A clink of glasses interrupted his thoughts. Linda stood just a few rows away, pushing the drink cart with mechanical precision. Her smile was forced, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she poured wine for a passenger. The act of service had never looked so much like penance. Malik felt every eye flick toward her and then back to him, as though the passengers were measuring both of them now. He realized something powerful. The true punishment wasn't going to come from Captain Avery or even from corporate HR. It was unfolding right here, in real time. Linda had to serve the boy she had tried to humiliate, and every move she made would be judged by the witnesses who had seen her arrogance collapse. When she reached row 2, her voice caught slightly. "Would you like a drink?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the seat back rather than Malik's face. He considered his options. He could ignore her. He could be curt. He could turn her own cruelty back on her. But instead, he heard his mother's voice again. "Grace. Son. Grace is a weapon they never see coming." "Yes, please," Malik said calmly. "A ginger ale. No ice." The simplicity of his request, polite and steady, cut deeper than any sharp remark could have. Linda's hand shook as she poured the soda, a small splash spilling over the rim of the glass. She handed it to him without meeting his eyes. "Thank you," Malik said softly. The words were ordinary, but they carried weight. He was reminding her, and the cabin, that he was not defined by her treatment. He was defined by his own dignity. Richard Lawson leaned back in his seat, watching the exchange with a small, approving nod. The pearl-clutching woman avoided Malik's gaze altogether now, her earlier whispers silenced by the shifting tide of the cabin. Time passed slowly. Dinner service came, the aroma of seared salmon and wild rice filling the air. Malik barely tasted the food. His thoughts circled endlessly, replaying every insult, every glance. He wondered if Dr. Sophia Bennett, the North Star executive scheduled to meet him in Seattle, would hear about this. Would she see him as a victim or as someone who had handled a test with strength? The seatbelt sign dinged off, and a new ripple of energy moved through the cabin. A few passengers pulled laptops from bags. Others reclined and settled under blankets. Malik tried to steady his breathing, to remind himself that this was just a flight, nothing more. Then the first officer appeared at his side. "Mr. Johnson," he said with a smile, "the captain would like to invite you to the cockpit, if you're ready." Every head in first class turned. The invitation was rare, almost unheard of since tightened aviation rules. It was a visible declaration that Malik wasn't just tolerated here. He was honored. Malik's chest swelled with surprise. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. His knees trembled, but his steps were steady as he followed the first officer down the aisle. He passed Linda in the galley. She was polishing a glass with pointless intensity, her movements frantic, her expression a mixture of dread and envy. He walked past her without a word. The cockpit door opened, and the glow of screens illuminated Captain Avery's face. He turned with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Malik." Malik's eyes widened at the array of instruments, the rows of buttons and glowing monitors. He had always been fascinated by aviation technology, but standing here, seeing it up close, was like stepping into a dream. The captain gestured to the co-pilot's seat. "Have a seat for a moment. I think you'll appreciate this." Malik eased into the chair, his heart pounding. Captain Avery began pointing out the avionics, explaining the navigation systems, the fly-by-wire technology, the redundancies built into every part of the craft. His voice carried passion, not just duty. As Malik listened, he felt a strange shift inside himself. The humiliation he had endured only an hour earlier seemed distant, small compared to this moment. Here, in the heart of the aircraft, he was being treated not as a suspect, not as a problem, but as a young mind with potential. The captain leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your father would be proud, and I want you to know, so am I. What you endured back there, it wasn't fair. But the way you held yourself, the way you stayed calm, that strength most grown men don't have. Don't forget that." Malik's eyes stung, and he blinked quickly. He nodded, unable to speak at first. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you, sir." For half an hour, he remained in the cockpit, absorbing knowledge and stories, each detail fueling his determination. When he finally returned to his seat, the cabin's eyes followed him again. But the energy was different now. Respect had replaced suspicion. Linda still had to pass by him, offering dessert and refills, her hands trembling with each gesture. The humiliation she endured was quiet, but relentless. Every interaction was a reminder that her power had dissolved, replaced by the boy's quiet dignity. By the time the cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled for the night portion of the flight, Malik felt a deep, unexpected peace. He knew the incident would not end here. There would be consequences when they landed in Seattle. But for now, in seat 2B, he sat not as a victim, but as someone who had faced down prejudice and held on to himself. He leaned his head against the window, watching the endless stars beyond the glass. The sky stretched out before him, vast and boundless. For the first time all day, he allowed himself a small smile. This flight was not just a journey. It was becoming the defining story of his life. By the time Malik returned from the cockpit, the atmosphere in first class had transformed. The quiet murmurs of passengers no longer carried suspicion, but something closer to reverence. Every eye had watched him step into the flight deck, and every eye had seen him return with the glow of someone marked by the captain's respect. Malik slipped back into seat 2B, still absorbing the weight of it all. The view of the night sky lingered in his mind, the glimmering instruments, the captain's voice echoing with stories of his father. It felt like a hidden door had opened in his life, revealing not just a path forward, but a deeper connection to the legacy he carried. Across the aisle, Richard Lawson leaned slightly toward him, lowering his voice. "You handled that with dignity, son. I've seen plenty of boardroom battles, but the way you stayed calm under fire, that's something special. Don't let anyone make you forget it." Malik nodded, grateful for the man's words, though a part of him still churned inside. Why did it take a stranger's defense, or the captain's recognition of his father's name, for people to finally see him as worthy? That truth cut deeper than Linda's accusations ever had. Dinner trays were cleared, and the cabin settled into its mid-flight rhythm. Some passengers reclined their seats and closed their eyes. Others flicked on personal screens, their faces glowing blue in the dim light. Malik tried to relax, but tension lingered, clinging to him like a second skin. Then Linda Harper reappeared. The cart rattled softly as she moved down the aisle, offering coffee and dessert. Her hands trembled just enough to betray her nerves. Every passenger who accepted a cup or a slice of cake seemed to study her a beat too long, as if silently judging her performance. When she reached Malik, her voice wavered. "Would you care for dessert?" He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw not just the mask of authority, but the cracks underneath. Her eyes darted away quickly, her shoulders tight with shame. She wasn't the woman who had stood in the aisle hours earlier with smug confidence. She was smaller now, diminished. "Yes, please," Malik said simply. "The fruit tart." Her hands shook as she set the plate before him, careful not to spill. For Malik, the moment carried a strange gravity. Here was the same woman who had tried to strip him of dignity, now forced to serve him under the silent gaze of a cabin that had witnessed everything. It was not vengeance. It was justice delivered in a quieter, more profound form. Richard Lawson watched the exchange, his lips curving into a faint smile of approval. A woman in 3C, who had been typing furiously on her phone earlier, glanced between Malik and Linda, her face tight with a mix of indignation and sympathy. Malik realized she was probably documenting every detail. Her words destined for social media where stories like this exploded within minutes. The rest of the service continued, each step another test for Linda. Every tray she placed, every glass she filled, carried the weight of her earlier actions. The passengers weren't cruel, but their silence was crushing. They spoke little to her, offered no warmth, only curt nods or murmured thanks. It was as though the entire cabin had become a tribunal, quietly rendering judgment with each interaction. Malik took a bite of the tart, its sweetness sharp on his tongue, and thought about what justice really meant. Was this enough? Was watching her unravel under the weight of her own prejudice sufficient punishment, or did justice require something more concrete, something that would prevent her from treating the next young passenger the same way he remembered his father's lessons about accountability? Justice was not revenge. It was truth revealed and consequence delivered. Tonight, truth had been revealed. The consequence was still unfolding. The hours dragged on, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop. Malik closed his eyes briefly, trying to rest, but his mind was restless. Images flickered his mother's smile when he had left Atlanta, the pride in Dr. Sophia Bennett's voice when she called him a prodigy, the flash of contempt in Linda's eyes, the way the captain's hand had rested on his shoulder. Sleep came in fragments, shallow and uneasy. He dreamed of walking down endless jet bridges, each one blocked by faceless figures demanding proof of his right to move forward. When he jolted awake, his heart thudded with the echo of that rejection. The cabin lights brightened gently, signaling the approach of dawn and descent into Seattle. Passengers stirred, stretching and adjusting. The hum of conversation returned, but it was muted, careful. Everyone knew the flight had carried more than just travelers. It had carried a reckoning. Linda made her final pass through the cabin, collecting trash and offering pre-landing mints. She avoided Malik's eyes entirely now. Her voice was quiet, stripped of confidence. To the others, she was professional but detached, as though her spirit had been drained over the course of the flight. When she paused at his row, Malik offered the empty cup with a calm, "Thank you." She took it silently, her hands trembling. That single exchange was heavier than any argument they might have had. She knew he had every right to hate her, yet he chose grace. Richard Lawson glanced at Malik once more, his expression unreadable at first, then softening into a small nod. It was not just approval, but respect, the kind reserved for someone who had endured a storm and emerged intact. As the aircraft began its descent, Malik pressed his forehead lightly against the window. The city lights of Seattle spread beneath them like scattered jewels, a promise of the future waiting for him. But he knew that when the wheels touched the runway, the ordeal would not simply vanish. Justice demanded resolution. For Linda Harper, the longest flight of her career was ending, but her reckoning was only beginning. The cabin might have been silent, but the judgment of passengers, the authority of Captain Avery, and the shadow of what awaited her on the ground loomed heavy. For Malik, the flight was more than a journey. It was a test of spirit, a trial of patience and dignity. And as the landing gear locked into place with a solid thud, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about his father's legacy, it was about his own. The future that awaited him at North Star Dynamics would be brighter, sharper, forged in the crucible of this night. The humiliation had not broken him. It had revealed the strength he carried, a strength no one could take away. The plane touched down with a soft chirp of tires on runway asphalt. A ripple of relief passed through the cabin, but for Malik, it was more than just the end of a flight. It was the closing of a chapter, one that would echo long after the seatbelt sign dimmed. The tribunal of the skies was over. Now came the verdict on the ground. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, the engines roaring in reverse as the aircraft slowed along the runway. Malik pressed his palms against the armrests, steadying himself not just for landing, but for everything that awaited once the plane reached the gate. For most passengers, the descent into Seattle was the end of a long night. For Malik, it was only the beginning of a reckoning that had been building since the jet bridge in Atlanta. As the plane taxied, Linda Harper moved through the cabin with stiff motions, checking seatbelts and tray tables. Her voice carried none of the warmth that flight attendants usually summoned for the landing routine. Instead, her words fell flat, heavy with resignation. Passengers obeyed, but many avoided her eyes. The silence was louder than disapproval. It was judgment, collective and unspoken. Malik sat quietly, his satchel on his lap, the worn leather strap a tether to something solid. He replayed the captain's words again in his mind, the moment when his father's name had turned the tide. Pride swelled, but so did a deep unease. Why had it taken his father's reputation to be seen as legitimate? Why hadn't his own achievements, his own presence, been enough? The plane came to a stop at the gate, the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign extinguishing signaling release. Passengers rose, pulling bags from overhead bins, murmuring polite goodbyes to one another. But no one moved quickly. There was an unspoken understanding that something was about to happen. Captain Thomas Avery emerged from the cockpit, his uniform immaculate, his presence commanding immediate attention. He stood at the front of the cabin, his eyes sweeping across the rows, finally resting on Linda Harper. Ms. Harper. His voice carried easily, even without a microphone. Remain here once passengers deplane. The words struck with finality. Linda stiffened, her face pale, but she nodded silently. Passengers began filing out, many casting final glances at Malik as they passed. Some offered small smiles, others nods of respect. Richard Lawson paused by Malik's seat, resting a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "You'll do great things, son," he said firmly, then moved toward the exit. When the last economy passenger had left, the cabin felt cavernous and empty. Malik stood, adjusting his satchel, unsure whether to leave or remain. Captain Avery approached him with a reassuring expression. "Stay nearby." "Malik," he said quietly, "you'll want to hear this." Moments later, two figures boarded the aircraft from the jet bridge. A man in a dark suit, his ID badge swinging from a lanyard, and a woman carrying a sleek tablet. The man introduced himself briskly. "James Caldwell, Director of In-Flight Services," he said. His tone clipped. He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Karen Holt, Human Resources." Both wore the serious expressions of people who had been briefed mid-flight about a situation demanding immediate response. Captain Avery wasted no time. "I reported the incident directly," he said, his tone professional but edged with steel. "I also received a formal written complaint from Mr. Lawson in seat 1A. You should review it." James Caldwell nodded, already pulling a document up on his phone. His eyes moved quickly over the text, his expression darkening. He turned to Linda, who stood near the galley, rigid and pale. "Ms. Harper," he said evenly, "we've been informed of a serious misconduct issue during boarding. Before we proceed, do you have anything you wish to say?" Linda's voice cracked as she spoke. "It was a misunderstanding. The system flagged the seat. I was following protocol. I didn't want to cause a scene. But the passenger refused to comply." Refused to comply. Caldwell's tone sharpened. "Our captain, the gate agent, and multiple first-class passengers reported otherwise, including Mr. Lawson, a Diamond Elite customer with over 2 million miles flown. His statement leaves no ambiguity." Karen Holt stepped forward, her tablet glowing with records. "Ms. Harper, this is not an isolated complaint. 6 months ago, Denver, a Hispanic family. A year ago, Miami, a passenger in a wheelchair. There is a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. Tonight was the culmination." The blood drained from Linda's face. She stammered, "I've given this company 22 years. I made one mistake." Captain Avery's eyes narrowed, his voice quiet but cutting. "It wasn't one mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences." The cabin was silent, but for the low hum of the air system. Malik stood motionless, his heart pounding. He couldn't look away. This was no longer about him alone. It was about a truth laid bare, an accountability that could not be avoided. James Caldwell's tone was clinical now, stripped of any softness. "Effective immediately. You are suspended from duty pending termination review. Please surrender your company ID and badge." Linda's hands trembled as she unclipped the lanyard from her neck. She looked desperately at Captain Avery, searching for a sliver of mercy, but his expression held only weary disappointment. "You've embarrassed the uniform," he said quietly. "And worse, you've harmed a passenger who deserved dignity." Karen Holt took the badge from Linda's shaking hands. An airport official will escort you from the premises, she said firmly. Linda's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she turned away. She moved stiffly down the aisle, past Malik, past the seat that had triggered the unraveling of her career. Her gaze flicked toward him once, a fleeting glance of regret, but he met it with calm steadiness. There was no malice in his eyes, only the weight of truth. The moment was over quickly. 2 officials appeared at the aircraft door, guiding Linda out into the jet bridge. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving the cabin strangely quiet again. Captain Avery exhaled slowly, then turned toward Malik with a gentler expression. "You've been through a lot tonight, son, but you handled yourself with strength and composure. I want you to remember this moment, not for the pain, but for the dignity you carried through it." Malik swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Captain," he managed to say. James Caldwell cleared his throat, his voice softening as he addressed Malik. "You have my apologies, young man. This never should have happened." "Our company failed you tonight. It will not go unanswered." Before Malik could reply, another figure appeared at the aircraft door, a woman in a tailored navy suit, her presence commanding yet warm. She scanned the cabin quickly, her eyes landing on Malik. "Mr. Johnson," she asked, her voice clear, "I'm Dr. Sophia Bennett, Director of Advanced Propulsion at North Star Dynamics. I'm here to meet our new intern." The words hit Malik like a wave of light. Relief, pride, and awe collided in his chest. He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." "Doctor." Bennett's smile was genuine. "I've read your work. Your algorithm was one of the most innovative submissions we've ever seen. You're not just an intern, you're a prodigy. We have a team waiting for you in Seattle." Malik felt the cabin shift again. The passengers who remained in first class glanced between him and Dr. Bennett, their earlier doubts dissolving into recognition. He was not just a boy in a hoodie. He was someone destined to shape the very future of flight. Captain Avery gave Malik's shoulder a reassuring pat. "Told you your father would be proud. Tonight, so am I." The weight of the night seemed to lift, if only slightly. Malik straightened, meeting Dr. Bennett's eyes with quiet determination. Whatever humiliation he had endured was now fuel. This was only the beginning. The jet bridge felt colder than Malik expected, after hours in the cabin's controlled air. The faint draft of the terminal swept against his face like a reminder that the night had not ended. He walked beside Dr. Sophia Bennett, her stride confident and purposeful, the click of her heels echoing against the narrow walls. Behind him, Malik could still hear muffled voices from the aircraft, the low tones of Captain Avery briefing James Caldwell and Karen Holt. Linda Harper was gone, escorted away under quiet authority, her career unraveling as swiftly as a snapped thread. Malik felt the weight of that truth pressing on him, not with satisfaction, but with sobering clarity. Actions had consequences. Some were irreversible. "Doctor?" Bennett glanced at him with a small smile. "I imagine this wasn't the flight you expected." Malik exhaled, a dry laugh escaping. "Not even close, said ma'am." "You can call me Sophia," she said warmly. "And let me say this. What you endured tonight, it's not just a test of patience, it's a reflection of the world we still live in. But the way you carried yourself that will be remembered at North Star, we value more than just intellect. We value character. Tonight, you showed both." Her words wrapped around him like a bomb. He nodded, though the knot in his chest remained. I kept thinking, if my father's name hadn't meant something to the captain, would I still be sitting in that seat right now, or would I have been dragged off the plane? Sophia's expression softened. "That's a heavy question. Malik. And the truth is, it shouldn't take a legacy to be treated with dignity. It should be your right as a person. But sometimes the world fails us. What matters is how we respond. You didn't let their ignorance destroy your composure. That's rare. They stepped into the terminal, its bright lights and polished floors a sharp contrast to the dim cabin. A cluster of North Star representatives waited near the gate, holding tablets and clipboards, their faces lighting up when they spotted Sophia. Malik suddenly realized they were here for him. His chest tightened with a mix of pride and disbelief. Sophia introduced him quickly. "Everyone, this is Malik Johnson, our newest team member. I trust you've read his paper." The group nodded enthusiastically, murmurs of recognition passing among them. One young engineer leaned forward eagerly. "That algorithm on drone stabilization, brilliant work. We've been discussing how to integrate it into our simulations already." Malik's face flushed, his heart racing. After a night where his very presence had been questioned, hearing his ideas praised felt almost unreal. But even as excitement swelled inside him, his mind flicked back to Linda Harper. Where was she now, being led through a side corridor, stripped of her badge, her world collapsing around her, 22 years of authority undone in a single night? Malik didn't feel triumph. He felt a strange heaviness, as if he had witnessed not just punishment, but a life unraveling. Sophia noticed his distraction. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "She's probably losing everything. Her job, her reputation. Part of me thinks, good. But another part wonders if she'll ever understand why it happened." Sophia's gaze was steady. "Reflection is her burden to carry. You cannot carry it for her. You gave her dignity when she offered you none. That's more than most could have managed. Let the consequences play out. Focus on your path now." Her words anchored him. He nodded slowly. They began walking again, the North Star team flanking them like a small procession. Passengers who had shared the flight glanced curiously as they passed, some whispering to each other. Malik realized his story was already spreading, not just through the cabin, but through every retelling, every phone screen lit with posts and texts. Soon, the world would know. Meanwhile, in a quiet security office not far from the terminal, Linda Harper sat in a hard plastic chair. Her uniform jacket lay folded on the table, her badge and ID beside it. An airport official filled out paperwork with detached efficiency, each scribble of his pen sealing her fate. She stared at the wall, her mind a blur of shame and disbelief. She thought about the look on Captain Avery's face, the cold disappointment in his voice. She thought about the passenger's silence, the way even Richard Lawson had turned against her. But most of all, she thought about Malik's calm eyes as he said, "Thank you," as if he were the professional and she the novice. The humiliation burned deeper than any reprimand. For years she had worn the uniform like armor, assuming authority gave her the right to judge. Tonight, that armor had shattered, and the boy she tried to diminish had become the mirror in which she saw herself clearly for the first time. Back in the terminal, Malik and Sophia reached the baggage claim. The North Star team retrieved his small suitcase, but Sophia gestured for an assistant to carry it. "You've had enough weight on your shoulders tonight," she said with a light smile. Malik chuckled softly, though exhaustion pressed on him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the raw ache of everything he had endured. He realized he hadn't texted his parents yet. Pulling out his phone, he typed a quick message. "Landed safely? It was rough, but I'm okay. Headed to meet the North Star team now." The reply came almost instantly. His father's words were simple. "Proud of you. Son, call when you can." Malik stared at the message, his throat tightening. He wished his father could have been there to see it all, to witness the moment when Captain Avery had recognized his name. But maybe this was better. Maybe it was his story to carry, his trial to endure. Sophia touched his arm gently. "We'll take you to the hotel. Tomorrow you'll visit the lab, meet the full team. Tonight, you rest." As they walked toward the exit, Malik glanced back once, toward the gates and the aircraft now empty at the end of the jet bridge. The image of Linda standing defeated in the galley flashed in his mind, her authority crumbling. Their paths had diverged so completely that it felt like fate had drawn a line between them. One path led toward promise, innovation, and a future where his voice would matter. The other led into obscurity, where past arrogance offered no protection. The terminal doors opened, and the cool Seattle night rushed in. Malik stepped through with Sophia at his side, the hum of the city rising in the distance. The air smelled of rain and possibility. He tightened his grip on the satchel. Whatever scars the night had left, they were now part of him. They would not define him, but they would remind him of the cost of prejudice, of the power of grace, of the strength that lived inside him, waiting for moments like these. Sophia glanced at him once more, her eyes gleaming, ready to change the world. "Malik." He managed a small, steady smile. "Yes, ma'am, I am." And with that, the future opened before him, vast as the night sky he had seen from Seat 2B. The hotel lobby glowed with soft amber light, a welcome refuge after the storm of the night. Malik followed Sophia Bennett through the glass doors, his satchel still clutched against his side, as if it carried not only his laptop, but also the fragile pieces of his dignity. The staff greeted Sophia with practiced warmth, their eyes flicking curiously toward Malik. She checked them in swiftly, handing him a key card. "Get some rest." "Malik," she said kindly, "tomorrow you'll see the lab. For now, sleep. You've earned it. Upstairs." Malik dropped his bag on the bed and sat heavily beside it. The silence of the room pressed in. For the first time since boarding in Atlanta, he was truly alone. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, his mind unwilling to quiet. The humiliation in the aisle, the captain's recognition of his father's name, the look on Linda Harper's face as the truth crushed her authority. Every detail replayed in relentless clarity. His phone buzzed. Messages poured in. Friends, classmates, even acquaintances he barely remembered. Screenshots of tweets, snippets of Facebook posts, shaky cell phone videos already making their rounds online. One clip showed him standing in the aisle, holding out his boarding pass, while Linda's voice accused him of being aggressive. Another captured Captain Avery's calm authority as he asked for Malik's side of the story. The captions told their own story. 17-year-old genius harassed on flight. Captain shuts down discrimination in first class. Integrity beats prejudice at 35,000 feet. Malik scrolled, his stomach twisting. He had wanted to arrive in Seattle quietly, to step into his internship as a humble newcomer. Now the world was watching. He dialed his father. The line clicked, and General Anthony Johnson's deep voice came through. "Malik." "You all right? I'm okay," Malik said softly, though his voice wavered. "It was rough." "I read some of it already," his father replied. "News travels fast these days. You handled yourself the way I hoped you would. Calm, steady. That's what matters." "But Dad," Malik whispered, "it felt like no matter what I said, no matter how polite I was, she had already decided who I was. And it wasn't me. It was some threat in her head." There was silence for a moment, then his father's voice, low and steady. "That's the world we live in, son. You can't always control how people see you, but you can control how you respond. And tonight, you showed more strength than most grown men I know. I'm proud of you. Your mother is too." Malik closed his eyes, letting the words soak into him. "Thanks. Dad, get some rest," the general said firmly. "Tomorrow you keep walking forward. This is just the beginning." After the call, Malik lay in the dark, the glow of the city outside painting faint lines across the curtains. His chest ached with exhaustion, but somewhere underneath, a quiet pride flickered. His father was right. He had endured. Meanwhile, across the city, Linda Harper sat in a small motel room with peeling wallpaper and a broken air conditioner. The airline had cut her loose after the late-night disciplinary meeting. Her badge was gone, her career effectively ended. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. Notifications lit the screen with cruel efficiency. News outlets had already picked up the story. Local stations were running segments. Social media was merciless. Her name, once synonymous with professionalism in her circles, was now tied to prejudice, humiliation, and failure. She scrolled through the comments, each one a dagger. She should never work in customer service again. Imagine thinking you can bully a teenager into coach. Disgusting. Her throat tightened. For 22 years, she had been respected, even admired. She told herself she had been firm, authoritative, a protector of order, but the mirror held up by the world told another story. She was not a protector. She was a perpetrator. Linda dropped the phone onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. A sob escaped, raw and unrestrained. For the first time, she saw the full weight of what she had done, not just to Malik, but to countless others over the years who never had a captain step in, who never had a name powerful enough to shield them. The night dragged on. Malik slept fitfully. Dreams tangled with voices from the cabin, the steady hum of engines, the sound of his name spoken with both accusation and respect. Morning brought a gray Seattle sky, heavy with clouds. Malik dressed carefully, the satchel strap once again across his chest, and met Sophia in the lobby. She greeted him with her usual energy, though her eyes softened when she studied him. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." At North Star Dynamics, Malik was ushered into a sleek building of glass and steel. Engineers greeted him warmly, curious eyes studying the young man they had already read about in headlines. Some offered handshakes, others encouraging smiles. Sophia led him through the corridors, introducing him to the team. "This is Malik Johnson," she said with quiet pride. "He is here not just as an intern, but as a collaborator. His work has already impressed us. You'll see why soon enough." Malik tried to focus, but part of him still lingered on the night before. Every kind word reminded him how quickly perception could shift, from suspicion to admiration, from humiliation to recognition. And he wondered how many others, without the shield of a famous last name, never got the chance to be seen fully, later, in a quiet moment. He sat by the window of the lab, watching rain streak down the glass. His thoughts drifted again to Linda. Was she reflecting now? Was she angry? Was she broken? Or was she learning, finally, what it meant to carry the weight of her choices? Sophia joined him, her gaze following his to the rain. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" He nodded slowly. "It's hard not to. Part of me wants to just forget it, but another part keeps wondering if she'll ever really change." Sophia sighed softly. Change is never guaranteed, but sometimes consequences are the only teachers strong enough to reach people. You did your part by staying composed. The rest isn't yours to carry. Malik leaned back, her words settling into him. Maybe she was right. Maybe the path forward was not about fixing Linda Harper, but about building something greater than the prejudice that had tried to block him. As the rain eased, a sliver of sunlight pierced the clouds, casting a glow over the city skyline. Malik stared at it, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. The world was still imperfect, still scarred by ignorance and bias. But he was here, standing at the threshold of his future, and no one could take that away. By the time Malik reached the North Star cafeteria for lunch, the story had already spread beyond social media chatter. National outlets were running segments. Screens in the cafeteria carried a muted broadcast, closed captions scrolling under the bright faces of anchors. The headline cut sharply across the bottom: Black teen genius harassed on flight. Captain intervenes. Malik froze mid-step, his tray still empty in his hands. On the screen, shaky video from the flight played. There he was, standing in the aisle, his boarding pass held out like a shield. Linda Harper's voice crackled through the poor audio, accusing him of being in the wrong place. Then came Captain Avery's steady tone, cutting through with authority, asking for his side of the story. Around him, engineers and staff murmured. Some glanced at him with recognition, others with quiet respect. The cafeteria buzzed with the weight of unspoken awareness. Malik lowered his gaze, heat rising in his cheeks. He had wanted to be known for his work, for his algorithm, for his ideas. Instead, his name was now tied to a confrontation that had gone viral. Sophia appeared at his side, gently taking the tray from his hands. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's sit." They found a table near the window. Malik pushed food around his plate, appetite gone. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket, notifications stacking like bricks. He ignored them. Sophia studied him quietly. "It feels heavy, doesn't it?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "It feels like everyone is staring, like I'm not me anymore. I'm just a story." "You are still you," she said firmly. "But the story has power too. Sometimes the world needs to see injustice clearly before it believes it. Your calm, your patience, your refusal to bend, those are now part of a lesson far bigger than this cafeteria." Malik sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to fly to Seattle." Sophia reached across the table, her voice soft but steady. "Symbols are rarely chosen, Malik. They are born in moments like these. What matters is how you carry it, and I think you're strong enough to carry it well." Her words eased him slightly, though the knot in his chest remained. Meanwhile, Linda Harper sat in her motel room with the television blaring. Every channel seemed to carry her story, though none called it hers directly. She watched her own voice echo back at her from grainy footage, heard her own words twisted into damning sound bites. She had told herself it was a misunderstanding. Now, the world believed otherwise. She scrolled through her phone, her inbox filled with terse messages from colleagues, some cutting ties outright, others expressing shock or disappointment. Old friends she had not heard from in years sent brief notes of reproach, as if eager to distance themselves. On social media, her name trended. The comments were merciless. People dissected her posture, her tone, her refusal to scan the boarding pass. Some called for lawsuits, others demanded her permanent ban from the airline industry. Memes sprouted overnight, reducing her 22 years of service to a caricature of cruelty. She dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands. The tears came freely now, hot and unrelenting. She thought of her mortgage, her daughter's college tuition, her identity that had always been tied to the uniform. It was all unraveling in real time, and there was no way to stop it. Back at North Star, Malik was ushered into a conference room for his first technical session. Engineers gathered around, screens lit with code and simulation data. His algorithm, once just lines in his notebook, now pulsed across large monitors, integrated into a drone stabilization model. One senior engineer leaned back, impressed. The efficiency here is remarkable. It reduces oscillation by nearly 30% under variable wind loads. Another added, "This could save us millions in fuel and maintenance over time." "Malik, how did you even think of this approach?" Malik explained, his voice hesitant at first, but growing stronger as he described the hours of trial and error, the inspiration from watching birds adjust their wings in shifting currents. The room leaned in, listening not to a headline but to a mind at work. For the first time since stepping off the plane, Malik felt seen for who he truly was. Not a victim, not a symbol, but a creator. Still, as the session ended and applause filled the room, he could not escape the thought of Linda. The image of her slumped shoulders, her trembling hands, haunted him. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction. Instead, he felt only the weight of how completely two lives had diverged. That evening, back at the hotel, Malik finally checked his phone. Messages flooded his screen. Journalists requesting interviews, advocacy groups reaching out, former classmates cheering him on. One message stood out, though, from Captain Avery. "I saw the coverage." The text read, "You handled yourself better than most seasoned adults would. Remember, Malik, you are more than this moment. Do not let it define you. Let it strengthen you." Malik reread the words several times, his throat tight. He typed back simply, "Thank you, Captain. I'll remember." Outside his window, Seattle glowed under the night sky, the city lights shimmering against the water. Malik pressed his hand against the glass, the cool surface grounding him. The storm was still raging in the world beyond, but inside, a quiet resolve took root. He would not let Linda Harper's choices define his story. He would let his own choices, his own work, his own integrity carve the path forward across town. Linda sat in darkness, the television off, her phone silenced. The world had judged her, stripped her of authority, and cast her out. She thought of Malik's calm face, of the captain's disappointment, of the passenger's silent condemnation. She thought of her own daughter, a teenager not much younger than Malik, and wondered what lessons she had failed to teach her. For the first time, she questioned not just the consequences, but the roots of her actions. And for the first time, she felt the stirrings of regret deep enough to cut through her pride. The viral storm raged on, reshaping lives in its wake. For one, it was the beginning of a new chapter filled with promise. For the other, it was the painful collapse of an identity built on fragile ground. And somewhere between them, the world was watching, learning, judging, and perhaps changing. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of work, attention, and reflection. Malik spent his mornings at North Star, diving deep into projects that challenged him in ways both exhilarating and humbling. His algorithm was already being tested on simulation rigs, and the senior engineers treated him not like a mere intern but like a colleague whose insight mattered. That respect grounded him, giving him a taste of the future he wanted to build. Yet outside the glass walls of North Star, the storm continued. His story was everywhere. National newspapers ran features. Late-night talk shows discussed the flight. Advocacy groups invoked his name as a call for reform in airline policies. Clips of Captain Avery speaking with calm authority went viral, celebrated as an example of leadership. Malik's photo, captured by another passenger as he sat quietly by the window, circulated endlessly, his face becoming a symbol of dignity under pressure. At first, Malik avoided it all. He wanted to be just a young man learning his craft, not a headline. But avoidance proved impossible. Everywhere he went, someone recognized him. In coffee shops, strangers offered quiet nods of respect. At the lab, younger interns whispered his name with awe. Even in the elevator, an older engineer patted him on the shoulder and said, "My grandson saw you on TV. He told me that's how I want to be when I grow up." It was overwhelming. One evening, Malik called his father again. The general's voice came through steady as always. "Son," he said, "I see the way this story has grown. I know it's not easy carrying that weight, but remember, the world does not just see your pain, it sees your strength, and when strength is witnessed, it multiplies." Malik swallowed hard. "I never wanted to be this, a symbol. I just wanted to do my work." "I know," his father said softly. "But sometimes the world chooses us. You cannot control that choice. What you can control is how you live with it. You live with it by continuing to build, by letting your actions outshine the headlines. That's how you carry my name, and now your own." Malik sat in silence, the words pressing into him like armor. Meanwhile, Linda Harper was spiraling. Job applications went unanswered. Calls to old colleagues ended in awkward refusals. The airline industry, small and tightly knit, had closed its doors to her. News outlets had uncovered past complaints she thought long buried, and each resurfaced incident painted a clearer picture of a pattern she could no longer deny. At first, she raged. She blamed Malik, the captain, the airline, the passengers who had filmed her. But rage gave way to exhaustion. She sat in her small apartment with blinds drawn, watching the same video clips over and over, her own voice sounding foreign, cruel, unmistakably wrong. She remembered her daughter asking timidly, "Mom, why would you do that to him?" That question cut deeper than any headline. Linda began journaling, not out of habit, but out of desperation. The words she wrote were not excuses, but confessions. She admitted the biases she had carried, the snap judgments she had made. She admitted the moments when she had chosen power over empathy. For the first time, she faced herself without the armor of the uniform, and the reflection was almost unbearable. Back at North Star, Malik stood before a group of engineers presenting progress on his algorithm. His voice was stronger now, steadier. He explained not only the technical details, but the philosophy behind it, how nature offered lessons in adaptation, how stability was achieved not through rigidity, but through balance. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Sophia smiled from the back, her eyes gleaming with pride. She saw not just a brilliant intern, but a leader in the making. Afterward, as Malik walked the corridors, a young intern hurried to catch up with him. She was shy, clutching her notebook. "I just wanted to say," she began nervously, "I watched that video. The way you stayed calm, it gave me courage. I've dealt with things too. Being dismissed, being underestimated. Seeing you made me feel less alone." Malik paused, touched in a way he had not expected. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you know." That night, lying in his hotel bed, Malik stared at the ceiling and realized what his father had meant. The weight of being a symbol was heavy, but it was also shared. Every person who drew strength from his story lightened that weight just a little. Still, the inner conflict remained. He thought often of Linda. Was her regret real? Or was she just angry at being caught? Could people truly change after years of harmful habits? He wanted to believe change was possible, because if not, then what hope was there for the world to improve? Linda herself was beginning to wonder the same. In her solitude, she replayed the captain's words, sharp and unrelenting. "You saw a young black man in a hoodie and decided he did not belong." She could no longer dismiss those words as exaggeration. They were truth, and truth, once spoken aloud, refused to be silenced. She started attending local community forums quietly, anonymously at first. She listened to voices of people she had never tried to understand before, families who had been humiliated during travel, passengers who carried scars from being treated as lesser. Each story pierced her, layering guilt upon guilt. Yet in that guilt was a strange flicker of something else: awareness. For the first time in years, Linda was learning rather than instructing. Back in Seattle, Malik's days grew fuller. His work at North Star was accelerating, his algorithm showing promise in real-world prototypes. Yet every evening, when he returned to his hotel room, he felt the dual pull of progress and responsibility. His career was taking flight, but the world expected him to be more than just an engineer. It expected him to be a voice. Sophia noticed the strain. One evening, she invited him to dinner at a quiet restaurant by the water. The city lights shimmered on the surface of the bay. "You look like you're carrying a mountain," she said gently. Malik exhaled. "Sometimes I feel like I have to be perfect, like one wrong step and I'll let everyone down." Sophia leaned forward, her voice steady. "You are allowed to be human, Malik. You are allowed to stumble. What matters is that you keep walking. Symbols are not perfect people. They are people who chose to keep moving despite imperfection." Her words loosened something inside him. For the first time in days, he laughed softly. "I guess I can live with that." The evening air carried a cool breeze, and as Malik looked across the water, he felt a strange calm settle over him. His father's voice, Sophia's guidance, the respect of his colleagues, all of it wove together into a net strong enough to hold him. Across the country. Linda sat in a church basement, listening to a community leader speak about justice and reconciliation. She sat quietly in the back row, unnoticed, her uniform gone, her identity stripped bare. Yet, for the first time, she felt something she had not felt in years: the possibility of change. Two paths stretched forward, one filled with promise, the other with repentance, and though they would never converge again, both carried lessons the world needed to see. The second week of Malik's internship unfolded like a dream. He found himself not just observing, but contributing meaningfully to projects that once seemed untouchable. Each morning he stepped into North Star's sleek lab, greeted by the hum of machines and the quiet focus of engineers immersed in their work. His algorithm was now being tested on live drone prototypes, their whirring rotors slicing through the air in controlled chambers. Watching the drones hold steady against simulated turbulence filled him with awe. Something he had built, something born from his restless curiosity and late nights of coding, was now alive in metal and motion. One afternoon, Dr. Sophia Bennett gathered the team around. "We've been running simulations with Malik's stabilization code. The results are clear. Not only does it reduce energy consumption, but it enhances flight safety under extreme conditions. This is groundbreaking." Applause filled the room. Malik flushed, humbled yet proud. He felt the weight of their respect, and it anchored him more firmly than any headline ever could. Still, even as his professional life soared, the echoes of the flight lingered. Every time he sat alone, the memory of Linda Harper's voice returned. The disbelief in her eyes, the sting of her words, the humiliation of being told he did not belong. It was not something that could be erased with applause. At night, Malik journaled. His entries were not for the world, but for himself. He wrote about the fear of being judged before speaking, the pressure of carrying his father's name, the quiet pride of creating something valuable. He also wrote about forgiveness, though he was not sure if he was ready to give it. Across town, Linda was living in a very different rhythm. Her days had no structure now. She woke late, aimlessly scrolled through job boards, and avoided calls she knew would bring rejection. The world she once commanded in crisp uniform had shrunk to 4 walls and the hum of a cheap refrigerator. Yet something had begun to shift. She kept going to those community meetings in the church basement. At first, she sat silently in the back, shrinking from eye contact. Slowly, she began to speak, haltingly at first. She confessed her role in humiliating Malik, admitted her years of unchecked bias, and listened as others responded with honesty, sometimes anger, sometimes surprising compassion. Each meeting peeled back another layer of denial. Each conversation forced her to see what she had refused to see for decades. Linda knew she would never return to the skies. That chapter was gone, but perhaps there was another path, one built not on authority, but on humility. Meanwhile, Malik's story continued to ripple outward. At North Star, executives decided to release a public statement. They celebrated his contribution, but they also acknowledged the incident that had brought him to national attention. Talent and integrity, the statement read, should never be overshadowed by prejudice. Malik Johnson's resilience reminds us all of what true potential looks like. The statement went viral, adding another layer to the narrative. Malik felt conflicted reading it. He appreciated the recognition, but he did not want his worth tied solely to the ugliness of what had happened on that flight. He wanted to be known for his work, for his mind. One evening, Captain Thomas Avery called him directly. Malik answered, surprised to hear the steady voice that had once cut through the chaos of the cabin. "Malik," the captain said, "I wanted to check in personally. I've seen how the world is handling this story. I hope you're not letting it consume you." "I'm trying not to," Malik admitted, "but sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, I'll always be remembered for that moment on the plane." The captain's voice softened. "Then let me remind you of something. That moment did not define you. It revealed you. It showed your dignity under pressure. It showed your calm when you had every right to be angry. Those qualities will carry you far beyond this internship, far beyond the lab. They will carry you through life. Do not fear the memory. Own it." Malik closed his eyes, letting the words settle into him. "Thank you, Captain. I needed to hear that." "You're welcome, son," Avery replied warmly. "And tell your father I said hello. He would be proud beyond measure." After the call, Malik felt lighter. The captain was right. That moment was not a chain, but a compass. Weeks passed, and Malik thrived at North Star. He presented his algorithm at a symposium where industry leaders marveled at his work. Reporters asked questions about his ideas rather than his ordeal. Slowly, the story of the flight faded into the background, replaced by the story of his innovation. For Linda, the road was harder. She found part-time work at a community center, not as staff, but as a volunteer. She swept floors, served meals, and listened to stories of struggle far greater than her own. The work was humbling, but it was also strangely healing. She had once wielded power with cruelty. Now she served with no expectation of recognition. Her daughter visited one afternoon. They sat together in the modest cafeteria of the community center. "Mom," her daughter said, "I was ashamed at first. Everyone at school knew. But now, I see you trying. I see you listening. I see you changing. That matters." Tears welled in Linda's eyes. For the first time since the collapse of her career, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could rebuild. Not the life she had lost, but a different life worth living. Back in Seattle, Malik's internship drew to a close. On his final day, Sophia handed him a letter. "Full scholarship," she said, smiling. "North Star wants you to finish your degree without worry. And when you graduate, a position here will be waiting for you." Malik stared at the letter, his throat tightening. He thought of the boy who had boarded that plane weeks earlier, nervous and hopeful, only to be crushed by prejudice. That boy had endured humiliation, had stood his ground, had found allies in unexpected places. And now that boy was walking into a future brighter than he had dared to imagine. That evening, he walked along the waterfront, the cool air brushing his face. The city lights shimmered on the waves, endless and alive. He thought of his father, of Sophia, of Captain Avery, of the young intern who had said he inspired her. He thought even of Linda, whose downfall and slow path toward humility reminded him that actions had consequences, but also that change was possible. He lifted his eyes to the sky, where planes cut silver trails across the clouds. He smiled faintly. His journey was just beginning, and it stretched out like the open horizon, vast and boundless. The story of the flight would always remain a part of him, but it would not be his cage. It would be his compass, pointing him toward a future where his work, his dignity, and his resilience defined who he truly was. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in the courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in the aisle of an airplane, in the calm voice of a teenager refusing to surrender his dignity, and in the commanding presence of a captain who understands that leadership means seeing people for who they are, not what prejudice assumes them to be. Malik Johnson's story is not just about one flight or one cruel mistake. It is about the power of integrity in the face of humiliation. It is about how quiet strength can speak louder than accusations. And it is about how society must confront the subtle, corrosive forms of discrimination that still linger in everyday spaces, from airports to boardrooms. For Linda Harper, the flight attendant who chose judgment over fairness, the cost was career-ending. For Malik, the cost was painful but transformative. He emerged not as a victim, but as a young man whose resilience lit the path to a brighter future. His work, his brilliance, and his character became his true identity, not the prejudice he endured. As you reflect on this story, let it remind you that our actions carry consequences, sometimes for a lifetime. Prejudice destroys trust, while compassion builds it. The choice is ours every single day. If this story touched you, show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more unforgettable stories of dignity, justice, and change. The next one may inspire you even more.